welcome back to another episode of the 706 podcast. I'm your host, Anthony, and we are
Tony,
Kirk,
and Connor.
Nice. All right, so today we're discussing 1982's Blade Runner, though we're talking about 2007's version, Blade Runner, The Final Cut. I hope everyone watched the appropriate version, but it is the film in which Harrison Ford stars as Rick Deckard, a Blade Runner set on tackling down a remaining set of fugitive replicants in a sort of post-apocalyptic Los Angeles in the fictional year of 2019 within the film. So we're here to discuss that. We're also here to discuss whether Olivia Rodrigo's album is the perfect millennial album or Gen Z's first masterpiece. So take it away, Kirk.
Well, I just got to say, it's great, but Harrison Ford is the villain, yeah? Like, it's about 4 slaves who escape and come to Earth as fugitives just for the chance to stave off death. And this random hot cop is on their tails murdering them. Anyways, enough from Dana Schwartz. I'm kind of saddened that you guys thought that was actually my take. I was actually quoting her. Yes, there are some curious takes on Twitter. It seems that this film has gained so much traction in the last 10 years in various circles, and it's become rather revered, right? You know, maybe it was that way throughout, but I think with the kind of the ease of access, right, the various editions, you know, we've kind of had new looks at this, and then, you know, I'm probably totally wrong, but this felt like almost the quintessential cyberpunk aesthetic to come out of the 80s. Maybe that's false. You know, I know there were other instances, you know, plenty, you know, that seemed to be a very prevalent motif or aesthetic, I should say, throughout the 80s. You know, things like Running Man, even kind of weird ones, Last Action, but not really Last Action Heroes. Plus that's in the 90s. Anyways, I'm delaying the point, which is I think this film is very important, not only to the last 30, 40 years of film, but also to me. You know, it really gave me an opportunity to see something that's very beautiful, but is also rather disgusting and revolting. And I think that's why we're drawn to it, because we see the endless sprawl of industry, and we see the poverty and the inequality, and we rarely see the sun in this film, and it's always raining, and the neon signs, and the, you know, it's like a dubious cultural representation. I'm not sure, you know, I think there's some Japanese there, but some Eastern influence, and it all seems like rather inviting and poetic, but at the same time, not something I'd like to experience myself. And kind of comforting, almost like, you know, a Saturday night, you're having a sleepover, and you're tucked in, and you're feeling really secure, and you feel very much engaged with what you're doing. And, you know, I think that for Blade Runner, there's like a certain nostalgia for me. And I think maybe it's the synths, right? That 80s wonder music that, I think of the Goonies immediately when I think of like 80s wonder music. But I thoroughly enjoy this film. As for the specific cut, it's kind of weird to have this be the final cut and for there to be some goofs. For instance, Bryant, the captain, I believe, explains the situation with the 6 replicants twice to Decker. He explains it once at his desk and another time while he's showing him the slideshow of their kind of mugshots or whatever. That was a little weird. And then also when Rachel comes to Decker's apartment for the first time, she's wearing a fur coat. Decker goes to, you know, wash off his face, and he's still doing that. And then literally the next frame, she has no coat on and she has a lit cigarette in her hand. She's walking towards him. I don't know, small gripes, but for me, for a film that has so many versions and remasters, like, can we please have the final cut actually be the best one? I don't know. But I'm not going to get into the philosophical elements of this film. I don't know. I think those have been tread on, and explored to death. And, we could do our whole philosophy 101 opening, first class argument here. But, I think the idea that resounds with me the most is that I don't feel as if these replicants possess the same level of humanity as we as humans, as natural humans do. So I guess maybe that makes me a contrarian, because I know most people think, that Decker's the bad guy. I think we are ultimately, as humans, are bad, but I think it's really kind of beautiful in perhaps a mad scientist's way to see what we can create, and to see how we can appreciate beauty and our own capacity for evil. And so I think really ultimately what the replicants are is a mirror. They provide us with a metaphorical mirror through which to see ourselves, a reflection of who we are. And I think a lot of our creations have that capacity in the modern age, in the postmodern age, I guess. Social media, proliferation of gun violence, parasocial relationships, poverty, inequality. So I think this is a nice little thought experiment. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of like, well, if they think they're real, then are they real? And what are they experiencing? But what do we think they think they think? And if you guys want to do that, feel free. I think just letting sleeping dogs lie and say, this is an excellent film. And I'd be happy to discuss more about the plot later and some interesting things I found. And I know I've been a little scrambled here, but overall, this was always going to be in my top 50 films, no matter how many films I saw. So I love it.
All right. Thank you, Kirk. You touched on a lot. And I think going off what you said, there's a million ways to take a discussion of this. So we'll kind of base it on the impressions at the end. But maybe it's worth also saying, since I didn't at the beginning, is I think this is one of the few films that we've all already seen, at least one version of it at some point or another. And it's also worth saying, I think, that just to briefly go over it, that there's kind of three main versions, four if you count the international one. So the original theatrical cut, of course, has a different ending. It's a much more happy ending in which Rachel and Deckard kind of fly off into the sunset, literally. There's also a narration by Harrison Ford. Those are both taken out by the time we get to the two later cuts. There's the director's cut, which, despite its name, is not actually in Ridley Scott's control, but was kind of a studio edit, which has weird coloring, kind of gets rid of the narration, but depending on which director's cut you're seeing, may or may not have that ending. It's really weird. So finally, the final cut is the one that took place over the 2000s, tries to get rid of a lot of the weird continuity issues that still exist, like Kirk brought up, but does do a lot better actually at resolving them. For instance, the death of the first replicant was atrocious in the original version. And of course, this has the kind of restored unicorn sequence that Scott wanted all along. So that's the difference, and why I insisted, of course, on the final cut, which I personally think is the best version, but I'll let Tony go next.
So I think that the debut single, Driver's License, spoke to the yearning of the TikTok generation, and that the follow-up single, Good For You, was a spiteful, punky, Avril Lavigne-esque return to that kind of millennial vibe. It's kind of nostalgic for a past we can all remember, but ultimately it's hollow. I think all the fan theories and all the discussion about whether, Harrison Ford is a replicant, which the movie obviously encourages with the unicorn stuff, which I think is a little not my favorite part of the movie. I don't love that bit. Obscures the real fact, which is the real replicant is Ridley Scott. A real replicant is Blade Runner 1982, the final cut, 2007. This movie is a Nexus 6 replicant. It is a beautiful machine. It is perfect. It is polished. It is the next level of evolution of cinema. It is absolutely seamless visually. It is the definitive science fiction world on screen in terms of its texture, in terms of its life. I mean, you can compare it to, I don't know, there's 2001, there's Star Wars, there's, Alien, another Ridley Scott film. There's a lot of other famous science fiction worlds that have been on screen, but in terms of its texture, I think Blade Runner kind of takes the cake. And it is cyberpunk, which is its own kind of offshoot sci-fi kind of aesthetic / subgenre, however you want to classify it. But this is one of the movies that transports me when I watch it. It puts me in a different place, in a different time. It takes me back to 2019, and I can remember living through these events. I can remember seeing the world like this, very nostalgic for me. I say it's a replicant, though, because it's a movie that's kind of bloodless. And it's a movie that I think I've heard other people over time say leaves them a little bit cold. And I get why. Even if I myself am a little bit ambivalent, because I feel that, but I also feel the movie's pull. I feel the movie's tug. I can see why it's a classic, and there are things about it that I really admire and at times love, as well as things about it that kind of keep me at a distance. And I have to acknowledge that those things that keep me at a distance are, at least on some level, intentional. The fact that, for instance, that Deckard is not a character. Deckard is nothing. He is not. Harrison Ford is fine in this movie. It's not a particularly good performance. I think he's just being Harrison Ford, frankly. And if you watch the theatrical cut and you listen to the voiceover, it is the most hilariously bored voiceover you will ever hear in a movie. Felt like he did it in an afternoon while he was sipping a beer. We did not watch that version, obviously.
He was drunk as shit the whole time during this part of his career.
I'm not shocked at all. I know no backstory about the making of this film, but and Deckard just as a character, like on the page, it doesn't really have anything going for him, which is part, I think, of why the replicant kind of, I don't even want to call it a fan theory, because the movie, as I said, itself really kind of pushes you in that direction. That, I think, is intentional. His kind of robotic nature, his kind of emptiness. But that's actually here's the thing about it that why I'm of two minds about it. I can see its function in the movie, because ideally, in my reading, he's a human, but he's just as robotic as the replicants, right? The whole idea, to me, I disagree with Kirk. I guess I have a more basic view of the movie, a more common view of the movie, where we and the replicants are truly the same, because they live for 4 years. We live for 80 years or 4 years or 40 years. The length of time doesn't really matter, because we are going to die. These experiences we have will disappear like tears and rain, as Rutger Hauer says at the end of the life. And the whole movie is about kind of coming to terms with that and realizing that where do we draw this line between what is human and what is not, right? So I think that Harrison Ford being a human being who is behaving in this robotic way is more thematically compelling than, oh, actually, he is just a robot, right? The thing about it is, though, is he is not a compelling character to really watch or follow dramatically. This is kind of similar to what I had to say about the Virgin Suicides, where the stiltedness of it and the distance of it is thematically crucial, but as a viewing experience, it kind of keeps me away from it. And like the love scene with him and Sean Young do not have any chemistry. Right? This is not a good love scene. It's not a good love story. But again, that kind of works with the movie, because that love scene, when they say, kiss me, or tell me, kiss me, or say, kiss me, it's sort of like they feel like two people who don't know what love is. They don't know how to connect, kind of trying to figure out how human beings connect and not being able to feel it themselves, but wanting to feel it and kind of going through the motions based on things they've seen in media or, things they've experienced maybe second or third hand. Which I think is kind of thematically sticky and cool and resonant in certain ways, even if emotionally I wasn't really drawn into those scenes. So I don't really have a lot to add. I'll say, again, visuals, absolutely amazing. Don't really have to develop that at all, because everyone knows this is one of the most gorgeous movies ever. Best part of the movie for me, in terms of the performances, is Rutger Hauer. Rutger Hauer injects some much needed blood and vitality into this movie. He is so electrifying. He is so compelling. And I think I've heard other people say this before. This isn't an original thought, but I really do feel like the movie about Rutger Hauer and that replicant character would be a better and more exciting movie than the movie we get with Harrison Ford. Although, again, part of the point of this movie, this is why I'm ambivalent, is that it is kind of slow, that it is kind of moody, that it is kind of atmospheric. And I admire this movie's willingness to just let us sit in that atmosphere and sit in that feeling, and just exist in this rainy and sad world. And I think that's very admirable. And it's kind of anti-commercial, too. And I think that I admire all those things about it, even if it will never be one of my favorite movies. That's the best I can put it. This will never be one of my favorite movies, but I like that it exists, and I like that it's a one of a kind thing. There's nothing else like this. That's it.
Some interesting points. Once again, Tony's wrong on a number of different levels, particularly around Rachel, but we could get to that later. No, I'm kidding. Good points, Tony. And I think one thing you might have missed is that Rodrigo's brutal, I think, really sums up a lot of the kind of themes you're getting at. But let's go to, last but not least, Connor and his thoughts on Blade Runner.
Okay, first of all, Sour is the greatest album of the silent generation. We're close, Anthony. And it's a 5 out of 10. And as for Cyberpunk 1982, well, the graphics are the best in the biz, but the gameplay and the writing leave something to be desired. Sorry, I was being coy, but my take is substantially similar to Tony's. I would say that in terms of visuals, this movie just does what no other movie I think has ever done. In terms of immersion, in terms of the texture of this world, the amount of detail, the amount of chaos in every single frame, and also just the simple fact that's kind of taken from, it goes all the way back to, we love them, folks, the German expressionists, right? These lines of beams of light, shooting across the frame at all times from a single point, these angles, these lines, this painterly approach that makes every single frame visually interesting and captivating. And to me, watching this, it's like caffeine. It's like a drug. It's intoxicating. It arouses me. It fascinates me. When I watch any single second of this movie, it really and it just completely, it's not even about world building or, it's so realistic. It's just simply the way everything is shot, the way everything is framed, the complete control of the camera, the extras, the setting, the scene, the mise en scène. It just completely captivates me, and it's kind of transcendent of the entire genre. I think this is a movie that transcends in its visuals. I agree with Tony. There's some things that are kind of lacking on the more, I would just say, like always, the ending kind of surprises me with how kind of nothing it is. I'm always surprised. I always look at the timeline and I'm like, wait, we're already almost at the end of the movie. Like, this doesn't feel right. I think the movie lacks like a third act that could impart a little bit more heft. We could have had more of Rutger Hauer's story. There was something a little bit just kind of missing, I think. And it's something of a wasted opportunity in terms of the kind of plot itself. I agree with Harrison Ford. I think we can see from, his performances at this time period. I'm not sure what other time period will be relevant for Harrison Ford, because this is sort of his glory days, but he always has that kind of checked out attitude. But here, I think that too is kind of transcendent in its way. The love scene, which is so sad and messed up, Harrison Ford in his robe with a whiskey in 2019, going through the photos of a girl on his saying enhance, enhance, enhance. There's something the miserableness of that image and the kind of the ennui and melancholy that he brings to it, I think is kind of indispensable. It's so much part of this world that Ridley Scott creates. And this tone, this incredible tone, which is so hard to describe, but is melancholic and sad, and what are some other synonyms for sad? But also, of course, it's full of this kind of chaos, and there's something intensely beautiful about it. And it's very sadness, and that's, of course, somehow kind of re-enters the theme of the movie, the kind of this light in the darkness, right? That's kind of in this, the flame that burns, the shortest burns brightest, right, et cetera, right? There's something, this movie, with its absolutely fantastical visuals, it kind of informs us in a way about, like finding the beauty in our own kind of fatal, tragic circumstances, I think it's amazing for that reason. They're also just dumb moments, like the fact that they have to explain to Harrison Ford what a replicant is makes no sense. There's a lot of just silly things like this. The one replicant who's not Rutger Hauer is kind of lame, and it's sort of a weird performance, and it's not very intimidating. Except that maybe that's part of the point, that he's a bit silly. He's a bit of an oaf. This is the first replicant that we see in the film. But yeah, I stand by my general point that like the visuals of this movie are absolutely incredible. They're kind of best in class. I think they're kind of transcendent. I think there's no movie that looks like this, and I think it's up there just with all-time, greats, simply just for the amazing detail and visual control and just the painterly quality of its images.
Very interesting points, Connor. I think as for my own impression or kind of this rewatch, with all three of you thinking about this movie, one, we got to say, of course, Philip K. Dick and his large influence over like the culture from all sorts of different projects. It's based on his book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? One of the coolest pulpy titles I've ever heard, I feel like. Though it doesn't really bear similarities to that book. It even doesn't really feel much like a Philip K. Dick if you want to compare it on that level. And then on the other end, I don't know. I have no way of quantifying this, but I have a suspicion that maybe besides Hitchcock and like some Wells and David Lynch, I feel like Blade Runner's got to be one of the most written about films of all time. It's been commented about from every angle, from a feminist angle to an ecological angle. It's been commented in Popular Science magazine as still one of the most realistic science fiction films, mostly based on the fact that LA is drenched beautifully in this kind of acid rain that turns the city's neon into like this kind of wondrous yet scary, horrific place. One of the aspects I love is how when the Harrison Ford gets into a fight with the lame replicant, as Connor called him, and after he killed the kind of dancer one with the snake, that no one on the street really cares that they're like fighting and they're like shooting guns, or he's shooting a gun first of all at that dancer, and then he gets into that fight. Like no one but him and Rachel and then like that one other cop like care at all, which says something I think so much about this world. But as for the larger question that Kirk was kind of bringing up as kind of saying, let's let sleeping dogs lie, I think he's kind of right. I think on one level, the sort of Harrison Ford, Rick Deckard, is he a replicant or is he human, is one of the most interesting, but also one of the least interesting aspects about the movie. And I think it's partly because the movie wants to pull us towards that with ideas of that unicorn, and of course, in the final cut, and that great ending line, which I absolutely love with Rachel, from Edward James Olmos's character, which it's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? Fantastic line, I think. If this movie came out today, that would be all over Twitter on everyone's bio. But I think in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of direction, there are some things that Tony and Connor are absolutely right about. The silliness of it, the test itself, like how does this exactly work is one thing I've always been fascinated by, which is like supposedly like the series of empathy like questions and how like humans respond to it. Yet at the same time, like empathy doesn't really seem to be the motivating factor for any of these characters. The most empathetic character is the sort of toy creator, the one who's taking care of this kind of building and playing chess. And of course, maybe you want to apply those questions there. I don't know. But as far as character itself, I think one thing we also need to keep in mind that this isn't just cyberpunk, which besides 1984's Neuromancer from William Gibson, it probably has had more effect on how we think about technology and cybernetics than anything else. But it's not just cyberpunk, it's cyber noir, I think. And I think one thing that we keep in mind when we think about that is Rick Deckard is implicated immediately if we think about it from the genre lines. Of course, he's kind of a guilty, not quite honorable hero. But in the face of it, in this world that we are, in the cyberpunk, in the cyber noir world, everyone is kind of guilty. Everything is kind of going on. The sort of replicants are kind of a sort of metaphor, of course, for the kind of racist attitudes and the sort of rebirth of almost a kind of imperial colonial idea. They're called skin jobs, is kind of the racist term that you hear from the chief of the police or whatever. And in fact, we hear at the beginning that they're used for the most dangerous human endeavors that we never even see in the film. One of the most brilliant choices I think Scott decides on, that we never see the sea beams, that we never see the mining of the colonies of the moon and stuff like that, which is all something to keep in mind. I think one of the things the film asks us to do is even though it gives us some of the best visuals I've ever seen, especially for a movie that's basically 30 years old, and yeah, it's been cleaned up a little over the last 20 or in the 2000s, is it asks us to also still imagine how these characters were living on the other side. And it's a world that may be only 4 years. It may be a life, and it's a life that we all have, and it's a life that all comes to an end, as Edward James Olmos says, but it's a life that's essentially just miserable. And so I think what Kirk was getting at too is absolutely right, which was like, they're kind of like, in some ways, they are the sympathetic things, but it's our sympathy that's being drawn, just as it's our sympathy that kind of is assumed based on because Harrison Ford is the hero. And I can't imagine, like, if we were to see the kind of final cut back in the 80s, the kind of assumptions you're making just based on the fact that Harrison Ford is the lead character is interesting. But anyway, I won't go on too much. I know I kind of threw out different pieces, not necessarily a coherent argument to the movie. But one thing I want to bring up, since we all talked about visuals, is Kirk, last time when I brought up this film, you said it was one of your favorite worlds you've ever seen. And would you like to expand on that, since you kind of stuck to the philosophy aspect a little, but do you want to talk about the world, why it's not a place you want to live in? Is this a world that you see actually happening? Is that part of the fear, or what?
That's a good question, Anthony. And I just want to say you all have really great points. And I feel like this might be one of the few examples where a lot of us are on the same page, because I have some similar reservations about the film. I will just say about Harrison Ford, I feel like he is kind of a safety blanket here because he's a knowable person. He's a knowable figure. If I didn't know who Harrison Ford was, say this was some nondescript character actor, I feel like this film would be a lot more uncomfortable for me. And instead, I feel safe. I feel like I'm kind of being guided through the world by this person, this escort who's protecting me in a way. And we see him, with some relative comfortability in the world. So we're to know that we also can feel comfortable and feel safe for a spell, I guess that is. But either way, I think the world itself, the choice of LA is so perfect, right? Just the history of LA itself. I rewatched Chinatown a while ago, and I think just it's so fascinating. Some of the West Coast infrastructure developments, and now we have LA is essentially 70 miles wide. It spans from like Santa Monica to Hemet, or you could even go down to what is the music Coachella, like the Salton Sea, and go all the way down there. But I think there is something there that is realistic, like you said, from an ecological, and also from you said like there was some other expertise that felt that it was relatively feasible. Was it like an engineering perspective, or
the magazine Popular Science has a survey they do like every so many years where they talk about the most realistic sci-fi movies, and this is always like number 1 or 2.
Right. Well, I think to me it is very hard to quantify, but I think it's like dreaming. It's a very, very interesting world, and to an extent it doesn't really matter what's going on within the world. Right? You could be doing whatever, you could be hearing or saying whatever, but you're so hypnotized by what you're hearing and seeing, and in a sense you're ingesting and you're experiencing, that I don't have many comparisons. And I think that's our whole kind of point. That's the whole gist of what we're saying, right? Is it feels so revolutionary. But to me, I think the idea of separateness yet congestion, right? The idea of this complete lack of any sort of cultural definition, of unbridled corporate greed and interstellar colonization. All of these things are fascinating in and of their own right. And it's kind of like, we can look at it from a Fisher perspective, right? And, go down that wormhole too, where we think like, do we experience some sadness or some relief or indifference that this 2019 did not happen on our timeline in our life? Are there elements that we kind of mourn the loss of? And I know that might be provocative to say, because we might think that this is just, straight up just a worse reality than the one we have. But is it really? And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Also, at some point. I'm curious if we'll mention the sequel at all, but either way, good question, Anthony.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Tony, or?
Sure. I just want to chime in about the world. I mean, I think that, Kirk hit on a lot of important points. I think that we always talk about world building with like science fiction as well as fantasy, right? And when I think of world building, I think of like the history has been, there's like hundreds of years, thousands of years of history that have been like sketched out, and like thousands of characters and all this stuff. And that might exist in Philip K. Dick's journals. It might exist in Ridley Scott's journals. But very little of it makes its way into the movie. And that's what I love about the world, is that I think it's so important to this movie's effect that we get just this tiny glimpse of this vaster thing that we don't understand, right? We're seeing all these little tiny details that we don't have any context for, because that's what it is like to be a person in the world, right? We only can ever know so much, right? That's part of the tragedy of human existence. And that's part of the tragedy of this movie's kind of about. It's like you can never understand this stuff. You can never understand everything. My single favorite detail in the entire movie, and it's kind of the biggest, broadest, most obvious detail, but I think it's so perfect, is the Coca-Cola sign lighting up. Because it always hits me like kind of a black punchline, because it happens. It's not the first thing you see. It comes like maybe 20 minutes into the movie, and it's like, yep, we still got this. Yep, there's still Coca-Cola. Everyone's miserable. At its best, the idea of cyberpunk as like an aesthetic or as a world you can depict, and what I think it conveys is sort of the idea of like, we've devised this technology that is truly miraculous, right? The idea of interstellar travel, the idea of being able to create consciousness. These things are like truly miraculous and like incredible, and in a way beautiful, or at least they can be if used in the right way. But it's basically like, we're still humans, right? And the systems we've created to structure our society still exist, and they still exist in their same basic form. So we're all still sad. And things aren't really better, but we have access to this. And there's something very tragic and it's almost like ironic. There's almost like a joke quality to it. It's like you wish you're granted your fondest wish. I wish I had $1 billion. I wish I had a spaceship. You get whatever thing you want, but the bigger problems are still there, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think that this movie's world is crucial to the themes, and maybe the way the world is depicted as well. It's not just like this incidental thing that's built on top of this story. So,
no, I think what Kirk was saying is absolutely right, and probably really important, which was like, and like what you're saying, Tony, is that we don't see the details. So a lot of it is still our imagination, or like we're kind of, when we come back to the movie, we're seeing maybe a little bit more, so we gather more clues to figure things out. But one of the most important things this movie does, I think, is it doesn't make the world look too cool. It's not like the Matrix necessarily, like, and different forms of cyberpunk, but like the Matrix is like a world that feasibly, it's like, oh, if I knew the Matrix, it'd be so cool to maneuver space and time, like in Blade Runner, though, the world actually does look kind of miserable. It's raining like all the time. It's weirdly cold in LA because you don't know how that rain's going to hit you. The cars like still pollute like awful. Like the richest people are probably not even living there. And like, it's just a slum essentially. And it's this like beautiful like city that we think of as LA just doesn't exist anymore. It's all just commercialized capitalism at its finest, or at its worst, I should say. But let me turn to Connor real quick, because you kind of agreed with Tony about the stiltedness of Harrison Ford and his acting, but also Rick Deckard's character. But at the same time, rewatching the movie, maybe one of the more essential basic questions that none of us have asked is, doesn't he kind of have to be boring to kind of go along and do all this anyway? And does that fit into the larger question? Like, you know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, like, why does he go on this endeavor at all? Like, he's just there eating his noodles to start off the film.
Yeah, I mean, no, and I think I ultimately agree with you, not just on the level of plot convenience, which is true, but then I think at the same time, the way the movie starts off is kind of bumpy. It's kind of feels odd that, it's the one last job, we need you, Deckard, it's a bit cliche, but, fits right in there in terms of noir tropes. No, but I think, Tony at least commented too on I think Kirk did too, on that love scene, which is kind of awful. It's a horrible kind of subversion of what we expect from kind of the noir romance. And obviously Rachel is this compelling, femme fatale kind of captivating figure, but who's also this fatal, woman who, I think you kind of needed Harrison Ford to be a bit of he's a wet blanket. However, he's also a warm blanket, as Kirk was saying. I also agree with Kirk that we need him. He helps us to find our place in this world. But that's about all I'd say. To the idea that he's a replicant, which I think is, obviously it's something that's we're supposed to consider all along. I'm having a lot of other thoughts, but I don't want to derail. Anthony, do you have other questions or
Well, let's talk about like the love scene in a second. I'll ask you, Connor, because I'm also thinking about Kirk's other point, which was like, imagine this is like any other actor, like a character actor from even today. I don't know, a Michael Pitt, just because I know Kirk likes him. But also, like, I think Kirk is right. Like, it would be a much more sinister, creepy movie unless it's like Ryan Gosling, which is an issue I have in the sequel, or like Keanu Reeves. But the fact that it's Harrison Ford. Okay, well, actually, side note before I get there, I'm actually really fascinated, I think, for younger people, like if they watch this movie with like the rhetoric of ACAB and things like that, if they kind of lump into the kind of, oh, Rick Deckard's like a horrible person to start. But that's a side point. I think going to the love story question, and why I think it needs to be Harrison Ford there, is it's Harrison Ford at arguably the peak of his beauty, post Star Wars, post Indiana Jones, still really handsome guy. This is 82, so like immediately after Indiana Jones, essentially, and in the midst of the Star Wars original trilogy coming to a close. But you need that attraction because he has to be blank. Because when it comes to that love scene, I think they need to both act out something, and I think they both are trying out different emotions. And I think I don't remember if it was Kirk or Tony were saying, I think the fact that it's sad and uncomfortable has to be the point there. Because when you put emotions as fully on the line as they are, it's always sad and uncomfortable. It's the most human thing is to put yourself bare and to try to have someone understand that. And I think when someone doesn't quite understand it, but you need them to, that's where the kind of awkwardness comes in. And I think that's why for me it works, because immediately after we get that great moment where Rachel says, "Have you ever taken the test yourself?" And it has to come after that. I think for that part to kind of really fizzle, which works for me. I can understand there's an awful outline, or especially kind of feminism reading. I'm sure of that scene. I'm sure it exists all over the internet.
I agree. It's awful, but no, I mean the kind of defeated way in which he flops on the bed with his hairy chest. It's like there's something about that moment, the kind of mutual defeat and hopelessness. Yes. That then precedes their, twisted love. I don't know. I mean, it captures something, I think.
Wait, hold on, Anthony. I got to back that up. I need to hear this again. What can you explicate what you're trying to say? You're trying to say that it's the only moment of human authenticity in the film. Is that basically what you're saying?
No, I'm saying it's one of them, though. And it's an early one because, of course, we get the great Roy scene where I think one of the most human moments besides his death is the greatest wish that every human has, which is you want your life, and you want the life as long as you want it, which is when he goes to the creator and he essentially says, "Give me life." And he realizes he won't give any. I think that's also one of the most human emotions in it. And of course, it's the great symbolic moment where we have the loss of life threatened with the want for more life, and he kills a sort of inverse of a Frankenstein-y sort of thing.
But he's absolved first, which I think is also important in the grand idea of the humanity of that moment, which actually I think that's the best scene in the film, but that's neither here nor there. And I also believe I've seen a version without the chess scene or the element, the chess element, which wasn't so drawn out. So I think that's kind of novel to this, along with many other snippets, I'm sure, this version. But yeah.
In the theatrical cut, when he kills the creator, they actually don't use the scene where he punches out his eyes. Okay, the weakest part of the movie, I think, is Daryl Hannah's replicant, who's the one with the black raccoon style makeup, who does backflips. It's one of the worst.
I thought that was Harley Quinn.
Yes, it's a Birds of Prey 3 or whatever we're on now, Suicide Squad 2. But anyway, in the last kind of wrap up, because Kirk brought it up, I think we've all seen it, maybe not, but the sequel. So quickly, because I don't know if we'll get to an episode on that. Kirk, why did you want to bring it up? Do you like that one more? Do you see something?
No, I think we have to do this with some trepidation, because I do believe that Blade Runner, is it 2049? Is that the year? So it's 30 years later. Yeah, I believe an episode is in our future. And I think it should be, because ultimately there's a lot to talk about, a lot more to speak about. It's newer, of course, and you can see the influences, and it's this weird recursive kind of implosion that is really fascinating. I don't think there's many analogs in terms of other film franchises or IPs like that. I don't know. It's really fascinating. I'd love to hear your take on Ryan Gosling, though, just right now. I guess that could be like a surface thing, but I think ultimately where it succeeds is it does make Gosling a little bit, it tries to stay there, but it makes him into a little more of a character than Harrison Ford. But maybe that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think just really superficially is like, what's funny is all the complaints here about like the love scene between Deckard and like Rachel, I think are actually much worse in 2049. I think the Gosling's like characteristic of like his yearning for Ana de Armas's like joy is actually much more like obtrusively bad in a sense. And I think it feels a little bit more real because it's kind of like a virtual like paragon. But I think it's also here in a much more interesting, nuanced way than that I personally see. I'm not saying it's right, but anyway, if we want to move on to final thoughts, I know we've been
Can I just give my sound bite?
Yeah,
2049. So I would say that it's better written than this Blade Runner. But honestly, having just watched this and thinking about how they have to like do CG Sean Young, I'm like, fuck sequels. Fuck dragging this shit out and just repackaging it and like selling it back to us. Like, fuck that. Like, this movie is better than that. Like, this movie doesn't deserve that. You know what I mean? Like, that was such a special, like, Sean Young should not be in another movie. You know what I mean? Like, she should remain, her image should remain in this movie. Of course, I'm being polemical. I did like 2049, and I would defend it as being kind of having a better story. And I would defend Ana de Armas, stuff, the virtual girlfriend or whatever. But I do have to say that it has some of the issues of sequelitis, and why do we need to bring this stuff back when the original work of art is just so great? And, I think we should have a little bit more shame about reworking these things.
I think, Connor, your poll quote should just be, we should have a little more shame. And I like that because it was very Kirk Douglas from A Letter to Three Wives. I just felt that character. I felt you channeling that character. But yeah, no, I like the sequel, but I don't remember it that well. I just remember liking it in the theater. I remember enjoying it viscerally more than this movie, I'll say. But I think Connor's probably right in some deeper sense, but I need to revisit it to have a more developed take on it.
My personal rule, and this is a very flawed rule, is that if you barely remember something despite having a positive reaction, it's probably just fine. It's probably nothing like.
Yeah, I don't remember it very well.
I don't think that's always true, because Y Tu Mama Tambien, for instance, that was kind of how I felt about it. And then on my second watch, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So who knows?
Okay, there's exceptions, but anyway, if we want to do final thoughts real quick, I know we've been speaking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll move on to the fan favorite section. But let's have Tony go first.
Okay, wow. This is tough, guys. Honestly, I was gonna say no, but I feel like I gotta be yes. I feel like I gotta give this movie respect. I do. I feel like I do. I gotta give it respect. I mean, there's no other movie like this. That's just true. I think it is a landmark in film history. Not that that's the only, it's not very interesting if we just give every canonized film a yes, but in terms of its visual opulence, in terms of its unique place in science fiction, in terms of its philosophical concerns and the existentialism and the idea of floating through this indifferent, shitty world that can also be kind of beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it's not a movie I'm going to rewatch a ton in my life, although I've seen it 4 times now. So what does that say? It's got to be yes.
All right, that's interesting. I wonder if Tony would have said no if he had gone second or third. I didn't plan this. I just feel like Tony usually goes second or third. We'll let Connor go.
Okay, so much I want to say. I should have done this in my introduction, but to Kirk's point about its influence on later movies, the lush visual spectacles of the 80s and 90s that take off from this, and I'm including Waterworld and the Super Mario Brothers movie. There's nothing like it. We've lost it, okay? And we have this movie kind of to thank for providing the ideal to which to strive, of that kind of concrete world with so much setting, so much wacky shit happening in the background, all of that. One other thing I would like to say is, compared to like the aesthetics of Cyberpunk 2077, from what I've seen, remember too that this movie loves layers of time. And it's I'm about to give away my grad student status here, but I won't go too much into it. But this is an interest of mine into in the world of classics. Layers of time and layers of history that is so evident here, right? It moves through so many time periods. Like I said, this is not just futuristic, so to speak. It is like Brazil. It is retro futuristic in its way. It also has Gothic elements. It has the candelabras in the CEO's, little suite and all this stuff. It has all these visual things, so many layers of time and setting, and it just really is transcendent there. I would say that I would be happy to go to this world. I would be happy to live in this world because it is so fucking beautiful. As long as, right, I would accept also just having same world I live in now, but a lot more horizontal beams of light everywhere would be nice. And I would say yes. We're talking about a visual medium. This movie just knocks it out of the park with visuals. It's unlike anything that's ever been made. Yes, it's flawed. It doesn't really have much of an ending. The replicant thing is a little bit silly. It's thought provoking, but as regards tone and visuals and performances as well, I think it's really strong. I think it's flawless in terms of visuals, and it's a yes, easy.
All right, cool. Well, everyone look out for Layers of Time, reading of Blade Runner and Plato by Connor, published by
Layers of Time. And also the Vangelis score, which is unimpeachable.
That's also the name of my cookbook, Anthony. Layers of Time.
Yes, and look out for Layers of Time, the cookbook, the Star Diner recipe. So, all right, Kirk, they took the suspense out, but how would you vote?
Dad jokes abound. So I would say that, one little factoid I wanted to add. This is for the viewers, this little bite. If you go to the Museum of the Moving Image in Astoria, Queens, New York City, you can see actually the models, the model of the Tyrrell Corporation that they used to film. It's a miniature model. Really cool. I think there is something there when we see that building and we see the enormity of it and we see its kind of obtuse, kind of ambiguous functionality, like it feels so alien and but also so tribal. But there's something there with that building. It's so iconic. I think if it was just, I don't know, shaped like a skyscraper or something, it'd be something different. But I really appreciate that. And I think this movie's an easy yes. And I will just say that I love Tony's line. I think he said, like, we have all this stuff. We've made all this stuff and we're still sad. Is that something you said, Tony? If not, I'm kind of bringing that forward because I think that's really true. We're still sad and this movie's still great. So anything that can kind of take us away for a little while, that can kind of break us out of, sometimes the prison of conventionality and, the idea of life as I don't know. Maybe I should have taken my antidepressant this morning. Just kidding, guys. This movie has a certain vibe. Like it kind of affects your mood too. It's really strange that way. But, for its power, I will give it credit, and I will say that yes, this is one of the 706 greatest films ever made.
Nicely worded, Kirk. And I agree. I second your Museum of Moving Image recommendation. That model, when you see it, is amazing because it's so small. It's like a pyramid meets like Mayan like pyramid, and the way they're able to put it on film was just kind of amazing, especially because you still see it light up at the museum. But without further ado, let's move on to the fan favorite section in which these three nominate a film, and I'll decide what we watch next week. So Kirk has been on kind of a cold streak, I think, lately. Last week he nominated his big guns with Titanic, but Blade Runner won. So Kirk, how do you want to organize this?
I'll do my best to be professional this week, even though the Titanic was a blow. But it'll be back. Kirk. It'll be back. It'll be back, Connor. And anyways, I think Connor will go first. I want to stick Tony in the middle again, and I'll round it out.
All right, you guys know me. I am the champion of old movies, except for Harakiri from last time. Sorry, Tony. Sometimes I don't pick the old movies, but I feel like it's my responsibility for this podcast. I have to take you guys back to the past. It is my ambition to get a silent film into the 706. I don't have a lot of them, I have to say. I've been watching some recently. Some of them hold up. There's a few of them that hold up that I think are still watchable. It's a testament, right, to the ones that I do like, how incredible they must be that they can stand the test of time. It's soon to be 100 years, right, going, that these movies can still hold up. So I'd like to present one that, clearly just comes to mind. I was thinking German Expressionism as we were watching Blade Runner. And I think another one that feels pertinent for other reasons is Fritz Lang's Metropolis from 1927, I believe. So this is a classic science fiction tale about a future city that is divided between classes, and there's sort of an impending civil war. And it's a silent film, but it has some of the most impressive visuals, and you can just imagine the trickery they had to employ to make this work. And they do use some models, like as Ridley Scott does in Blade Runner. Also, this fantastic use of mirrors. If you ever want to, get into the way this movie is made, it's absolutely fascinating. But that's my suggestion. Obviously, it depends on your particular taste, Anthony. But I'm shooting my shot.
All right, interesting. It was a matter of time before the silent generation was introduced. But Tony, you're up.
All right. I'm going to nominate kind of an early version of the Tony movie. A Tony movie. This isn't quite as true now, but in college, it was very much the nihilistic, grimdark, baby murdering, there is no hope sort of genre was my wheelhouse. This is an early staple of the genre, and this is Sidney Pollack's 1969 They Shoot Horses, Don't They, with Jane Fonda, about some folks who are in a dance marathon. They got to keep dancing to win the big prize, and they just got to keep dancing. A harrowing film, very dark and sad, and I don't know. There's just something about it where I think about it sometimes. I'm like, yeah, man, that was something. Ooh, I remember watching it in film school, and I dabbed my brow with my kerchief after it was finished, which I can't say that too often. So that's my pitch.
Interesting. All right, Kirk, what do you have?
All right, so I want Anthony to be in a position of polarization. I don't know if he'll utterly hate this film. I know he's seen it. Actually, I'm 99% certain he's seen it. But I kind of been going on this trend of populist picks, and I'm bending the definition here a little bit. But the reason I think it works is because this is a film that some critics or cinephiles would look at and say it's somewhat facile or basic, including maybe one of my co-hosts whose name starts with a T. But it is the film, just looking up the year. Oh yeah, 2004. So you guys were, around 10 years old. Sideways. I'm going to try again. I've nominated this film before. There's a reason I'm bringing it back, because I believe that we need to see this side of California, a side that exists outside of, you know, Mission and outside of the Castro, or, you know, Pershing Square or Sunset Boulevard. You know, this is Solvang, this is Buellton, this is Oxnard. Anthony, come on, if you don't like a film that takes place in Oxnard, coming from where you do in the LA vicinity, I mean, that's what it is. But ultimately, the reason I like this film is because it's so fucking sad. It really is. It's about this man who kind of wakes up one day and has come to the realization that he's missed so much potential in his life. And I think that's so relatable to all of us, and something we try to hide from through a variety of means throughout our day. But it's a Black comedy in a sense. There's some really funny goofs, some great acting, and some great shots as well. But I do want to sell this. This is one I feel very strong about, and I feel like I could pitch the populist angle about, but we'll see. It's your preference, but interested to hear the rebuttals.
Yes, that was a nice attack on Rancho Cucamonga, my hometown. Nothing like Oxnard, California, but let's see. Some actually very interesting, distinct choices of, you know, across time. So we'll need some rebuttals. I'm clueless at the moment.
I would just like to say that Metropolis is the true populist pick because it depicts ultimately the union of the working class and the upper class, mercantile class, united by the spirit of love and hope. That, despite being black and white and 2.5 hours long, but it is an amazing movie. It still holds up. There's a dancing robot woman who does the Charleston and things like this. And I think it's kind of a must watch from the silent repertoire. If anyone hasn't seen it, I think it's really worth at least giving a shot to on the podcast. But I have not seen either of the other movies. They both fascinate me. Tony's frightens me. Kirk's intrigues me. I know nothing about either of the two. I don't even know the general premise.
I'm surprised. I was gonna say mine feels like a classic Connor pick. Like I thought, like, oh, this is a Connor movie. I thought about waiting until you were up to pitch it for personally. I'll say, first of all, Kirk's movie Sideways. He says it's a relatable theme about being filled with regret and you know, wasting time and making bad choices. What kind of loser would think things like that? I can't relate to that at all. And I'm kind of feeling some secondhand embarrassment that he would even pitch a film such as that. As for Connor, a silent movie, wait, hello, I have speakers on my TV. They're not going to get used. Okay, I can go to the museum and look at a picture on the wall if I was a loser. So if you're cool and you want to see a movie about horses getting shot and people dancing and having fun, should pick mine. I don't know. I think mine is not a populist choice. I'll say that. If you hate the people, you'll pick mine.
All right. Well, I think both of their films, I've seen neither. I think they're both important because despite their age, I've heard of them, a relative layman such as me. But, I'll explain a little bit. Sideways about a teacher, a public school teacher in his 40s, divorced, no kids. He goes on a bachelor party trip to wine country with his kind of friend / acquaintance who he doesn't really have much in common with. And, they just spend a week together. A lot happens. And, I think the quintessential kind of feeling or vibe, sensation that you get is, have you ever been at a place where it's like a lot of people are having fun around you and ultimately you're not having fun and you don't understand why you're not having fun? It's kind of like that.
No.
Okay. Tony really is just overloaded on serotonin, the motherfucker. He is a G. We got to give it up to him. But no, I think it's a harrowing, it's a sad film, but ultimately it's beautiful because there is room for growth beyond our formative years. And I'd also like to just, talk a little bit about Paul Giamatti and Virginia Madsen, Sandra Oh. These are all really good actors, and we can talk a little bit about what the kind of artistic subgenre of Oscar film, like of popular cinema in the early 2000s looked like, and how it's developed, and whether or not it's become more polarized or more mainstream. This is a good kind of watermark for where cinema, national releases were headed in the early 2000s. So there's a meta conversation to be had as well.
All right. Very interesting arguments. Kirk, you pulled out all the stops for yours, I felt like, towards that end there. Let's see. I feel like, okay, I've seen Metropolis. I agree. It's one of the 15 greatest films, I think, honestly. It's an interesting one. I think there was a collective sigh. I think everybody was waiting for the birth of a nation here, but didn't happen. I am going to toss Metropolis for now, though. I don't think it's time. Maybe one day. It's a great film.
We should talk about Paul von Wolfenmeyer's film career. Why not?
Tony's film. I was a little disappointed because I thought he was nominating the greatest episode of Gilmore Girls, season 3, episode 7, which is also named They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And it's about an all-night dance contest in the small town of Sleepy Hollow. So I'm going to go with Kirk's film. One, because I want the movie to be an exception to my rule, because I did not like it much the first time, but mostly because I haven't been back to California since before the pandemic. So I'm a little nostalgic to see my home state, and Blade Runner didn't fulfill that nostalgia. I mean, I know that's what it looks like now, but I got to see Oxnard. I got to see this place again, Kirk. So we'll go with Sideways.
I'm very honored, Anthony. I will do my utter darndest to change your opinion, or at least accept your opinion, but state mine as eloquently as possible. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to map out their routes, kind of figure out what's going on. I may actually even fly out to California and reenact this movie myself, including banging Sandra Oh doggy style at the local Best Western in Buellton. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Let's sign it off with Anthony. Why don't you take us home?
I'll have what she's having.